Imagine a mother who survives by collecting cans, sleeps on the floor with her son, and still has the courage to share the little she has with a stranger on the street. Now imagine that a few hours later, her son is humiliated in front of the entire school. "You stink like garbage. This place is not for people like you." That's what he heard from the one he was supposed to teach. And she heard everything from the gate, without reacting, without a voice, only with her eyes full of shame and her heart in pieces. Now hold on to this. That same night, the shack where they lived catches fire. And in the midst of the smoke, despair and total loss, the boy looks at his mother and asks, trembling, "Are we going to die in the street?" Anyone would have given up there, but Claire didn't, because she believed that someone, somewhere, still saw her heart, and someone saw a man, simple, silent, disguised. I was there the whole time, watching, first when she shared her food with a stranger, then when she was humiliated at the school gate, and finally when he lost everything. But who was this man? Why was he always around? And why, the next day, did he show up with a luxury car and bodyguards, revealing a secret that no one expected? "This woman taught me what dignity is." Those were his words. But what he did next was even more unbelievable. And there's more. What was the connection between him and that hungry man on the street? Why did he know so much about her life? And what really happened to the teacher who humiliated the boy? This story will take you on a journey of pain, faith, and revelations that you won't believe are real. Because not everything is what it seems, and those who seem to have nothing sometimes carry everything the world needs to learn. Watch until the end, because when the secret is revealed, you will understand why her life changed forever. Claire held her son's hand tightly as they walked under the scorching Abidjan sun. It was midday. The asphalt was shaking with the heat, and the sound of horns, mixed with the shouts of vendors, seemed to want to swallow any hope of silence. Claire was there, as she did every day, pushing her old rusty cart with some cans and pieces of iron that she had collected early in the morning from the streets. Her hands, already calloused and dark with dirt, showed how much each penny had a weight, and her gaze, oh, her gaze, it had a long, suffering firmness, like someone who has waited too long for a promise that never came. Mathis, her son, walked alongside her with short steps, trying to keep up with his mother's haste. His hair was disheveled, his feet were in torn slippers, and his stomach was growling loudly, as if he wanted to speak for him. "Mommy, why don't we have a home?" he asked, without malice, without pressure, just with the naivety of a child who still believes that everything can be solved with a question and a hug. Claire stopped for a moment. She felt the question like a stone in her chest. She looked at her son, squeezed his hand tighter, and answered softly, almost whispering, "We'll still have one, mon fils. But for now, Mommy will take care of you with whatever she has." It wasn't the first time Mathis had asked this, and it probably wouldn't be the last, but every time it hurt the same. They slept in a makeshift wooden corner in a remote shanty town, where the floor was made of packed clay and the roof threatened to collapse with any heavy rain. The ladies' shack, if it could be called that, was shared with rats, cockroaches, and the constant fear that someone would show up to throw them out of there too. But that was all they had. And Claire, even in that situation, never let a blanket go without covering her son, even if she herself slept on the cold floor. But what caught the most attention about her was her heart. Claire had a kindness that irritated the most skeptical. Even without food to eat, even being rejected by her neighbors, even collecting wounds that no one saw, she still managed to smile. And it wasn't a forced smile, the kind we give so as not to seem weak. It was a sincere smile, of someone who still believed that good would return, maybe out of faith, maybe out of habit, maybe just because, if she stopped believing in it, she would fall apart completely. What matters is that on that day, amidst so much pain, Claire stopped everything when she saw an old woman sitting on the sidewalk. The woman was elderly, with sunken eyes, wrinkled skin, and she was shivering from the cold, even under the sun. Claire looked at Matisse, then at the plastic bag where she kept a piece of dry bread and some leftover rice that she had gotten at a restaurant. She took a deep breath. Her son's stomach was growling, but she didn't think twice. She took half of the food and knelt down next to the woman. "Madame needs it more than I do," she said in a firm but gentle voice. The woman looked at her, surprised, as if she didn't understand what was happening. Matisse looked at her too. "But Mom," he tried to protest, but Claire just touched his shoulder, signaling for silence. "We'll be fine, mon amour. God is watching everything." That was it. Claire had this habit of talking to God like she would talk to a neighbor, as if she was sure that sooner or later he would answer her. And that's where the detail that many people don't see lies. Because Claire's goodness didn't come from ignorance, nor from false positivity. It came from the conscious choice to continue being good, even after having been hit so hard by life. She had already lost everything: father, mother, husband, home, but she never lost faith, and she never let hunger turn her heart to stone. As she got up from the ground and picked up the cart again, a woman in a suit rushed past and bumped into Claire hard, without even apologizing. Claire staggered but remained standing. Matisse grabbed her arm. "She didn't even look at you, Mom." Claire just smiled. "Maybe she was in a hurry to save the world, son." It was always like that. Claire turned pain into learning, injustice into compassion, even when no one was looking. But was no one really looking? There, on the other side of the street, inside a simple car parked discreetly, someone was watching everything, someone who didn't seem to belong to that scene. A man with attentive eyes, a firm expression, and a slight smile on the corner of his mouth. He seemed to have seen something invaluable there, something that money could never buy. But Claire, of course, had no idea that such an ordinary, everyday moment was about to change everything. And maybe, just maybe, the world was also about to see who Claire really was. But before that, something even crueler would have to happen, because sometimes life tests even the strongest, just to see how far the faith of those who still believe in good will go. And what Claire would face next, well, you'll have to see that to understand how far a mother's love can go. Did you feel it there too? Because here, it was impossible not to get goosebumps. Claire could be any one of us. A mother struggling alone, with faith, with hunger, but with a heart that still believes in good. Stories like this are not just videos. They are mirrors of real life. They are punches and hugs at the same time. And only those who truly feel it understand the value of this. Are you here now? Then it's because there's something in your heart that connects with this. You're part of this group of people who still believe in justice, pure love, and impossible turns. Come be part of this community that values what is deep, strong, and truly African. Here, each story is meant to move you, lift you up, and remind you that there is still beauty in the world. So don't leave it for later. Press the button now. Subscribe. Click no like with strength and stay with us, because the next story will touch even deeper. That morning, Claire woke up earlier than usual. Not that she slept much. With the noise of the favela, the constant fear of someone trying to break into the shack, and the worry about what Matisse would have for breakfast, her body got little rest, but her mind never stopped. She adjusted the thin blanket over her son, who was still sleeping curled up in the corner of the torn mattress, and went out, careful not to wake him. I needed to gather a few more cans before school. He knew Matisse didn't like being late. It wasn't just for discipline, it was for fear of being the center of attention, and not in a good way. On the way back, with her fingers aching and her blouse damp with sweat, Claire made herself a cup of weak tea with a piece of stale bread. Matisse didn't complain. He never complained, and that was what broke her heart even more. He just looked at his mother, gave her a shy smile, and asked, "Can we bring snacks today, Mommy?" Claire smiled back, trying to hide her pain. "Today's snack is a surprise, mon fils. But take this one for now." And she handed him the rest of the bread wrapped in a piece of newspaper. When she arrived at school, Claire insisted on walking her son to the gate, as she always did. She straightened the collar of his borrowed shirt and combed his hair with her own fingers. "God bless you, okay?" she said, kissing Mattis on the forehead. He ran toward the classroom, but before entering he turned and waved. Claire waved back, as if she were giving the most precious thing she had to the world, and hoping that the world wouldn't destroy it. But that day, the world wouldn't forgive her. Mattis entered the room with his shoulders hunched, as if he were trying to make himself smaller so as not to bother anyone. But even though he was small, he was bothersome, not because he was doing anything wrong, but because his presence there, with his worn-out clothes and the smell of the street, reminded everyone of a reality that many wanted to ignore. And the person who seemed most bothered by this was precisely the one who should have welcomed them, Madame Lucille. Madame Lucille was the kind of person who smiled at rich parents, made a sweet voice for anyone who wore new shoes, but turned up her nose every time Mattis walked into the room. She said she was there to teach, but she seemed more interested in maintaining the level of the class than in giving them a real opportunity. And that day, for some reason known only to her, or perhaps out of pure contempt, she decided to cross the line. As soon as Mattis sat down, she walked over to his desk. With a look of visible disgust on her face, she pointed at the boy and said, loud enough for the entire class to hear, "You stink like garbage. Go away. This place is not for people like you." The silence that filled the room was deafening. Some students widened their eyes, others laughed nervously, and some simply lowered their heads in embarrassment. But Mattis was paralyzed. He didn't quite understand at first. He thought he had heard wrong. But when he looked into the teacher's eyes, he saw that she was serious, that she wasn't joking, that she really wanted him out of there. He stood up slowly, his eyes filled with tears, trying to hold back his tears. Trying, because he knew that if he cried there, he would give her exactly what she wanted. Another reason to humiliate him. He looked at his classmates, all silent, no one saying anything, no one defending him, no one offering a hand. He turned and left, his eyes glued to the floor and his heart tight in his chest. Outside, Claire was still near the gate. She had stopped to talk to another mother and was waiting for the bell to ring before leaving. When she saw her son leave in the middle of class, his eyes red and his steps hesitant, something inside her lit up. She ran to him and knelt down. "What happened, Mattis? Why did you leave the room?" He hesitated. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to protect his mother from the pain she was feeling. But the truth escaped his eyes before it came out of his mouth. He just hugged Claire tightly, as if asking for help without saying a word. And she understood. She always understood. A few feet away, Madame Lucille appeared in the doorway of the classroom, crossed her arms, and observed the scene with disdain. "That child is disturbing others. She should study somewhere else. This is a serious school." Claire listened. She heard every word. And for a second, she wanted to scream, wanted to break something, wanted to make the world hear her outrage. But she didn't scream. She just stood up with Mattis still hugging her body and looked the woman straight in the eye. "What my son is most disturbing about is the comfort of those who pretend that poverty is synonymous with dirt. And that, madame, is a lesson that not everyone learns in college." Claire picked up Mattis's backpack from the floor and left. On the outside, she was strong. But on the inside, every word that woman had, Claire said, had been a knife, because it wasn't just about her son. It was about her, about what she represented, about what thousands of women like her go through every day. And the worst part, no one there seemed to care. But remember that man in the car? The one who saw Claire sharing food with the lady on the street? Well then, what Claire didn't know is that he had also heard everything that happened at school. He was there again, parked on the other side of the street, watching, listening and feeling. His name, well, You'll find out about that later. What matters now is that, at that moment, something inside him moved, and this humiliation that Matisse suffered was about to trigger a turnaround that no one, absolutely no one, could have foreseen. But before that could happen, Claire and Matisse would have to go through one more pain, something that would make it even clearer who was on their side, and who could only point the finger, and what comes next will shake you even more, because sometimes rock bottom is just the beginning of a miracle. Claire barely had time to breathe after the humiliation her son suffered. In the days that followed, she tried to act normally, but you could see in her eyes that something had broken inside. It wasn't the first time her son had been rejected because of poverty, but it was the first time Claire felt like giving up. We think some people can handle anything, right? But everyone has a limit, and she was close to hers. But life, as these things, when everything seems to stand still, a new piece enters the board, and sometimes it changes the entire game. The next morning, as Claire was pushing her cart to the junkyard, something unusual happened in front of the school. A simple car with worn paint and a cracked bumper parked discreetly on the other side of the street. Nothing flashy. It looked like just another old car parked there. But the person who got out of it was someone who, on the outside, no one would notice. Worn-out pants, faded shirt, a cap covering part of his face. He walked slowly, almost as if he didn't want to be noticed. And he wasn't. Because when someone seems to have nothing, the world makes a point of not seeing it. The man introduced himself at the office as Monsieur Jérôme. He said he was there for work, interested in visiting some public schools in the area. He didn't say anything more than that. It didn't seem important. Not even the security guards at the gate were concerned. But what no one had any idea was that this man had a story completely different from his appearance. Monsieur Jérôme was, in fact, one of the most influential men in West Africa's education sector. A billionaire businessman, he founded a network of private schools that have already transformed thousands of lives. But he was different from most people. He didn't like to be seen. He didn't wear expensive suits, give interviews, or surround himself with sycophants. Jérôme believed in one thing: a person's character only shows when they think they're not being watched. That's why he often went out in disguise, listening, observing, meeting ordinary people, living what they lived. Because only then, according to him, could he truly understand how to change something. That day, Jérôme was there because he had heard about an unusual situation. A friend, the owner of an NGO, had mentioned in passing that a woman was being treated unfairly at the gates of a public school. The description he gave matched what Jérôme had seen a few days earlier, the woman sharing her food with a homeless woman. That stayed with him. Something about that look, that silent strength, would not leave his memory. So he decided to go to the school himself. He entered the teacher's lounge without fanfare. He heard loose conversations. He saw the way certain names were mentioned. He overheard, without meaning to, a mean joke about the can collector and her smelly son. All this without saying who it was, just observing, quietly. But inside, every offensive word was written down in invisible ink in the notebook of his memory. He didn't react, not yet, because Jérôme knew that great turnarounds don't happen with shouting. They happen in silence, at the right time, with the most unexpected blow. On the way out, he stood for a few minutes in front of the school, leaning against the gate, as if waiting for someone. The students passed by him without even noticing, except for one, Matisse. The boy stopped. He looked at the man in plain clothes and thought for a moment. "Bonjour, monsieur," he said politely. Jérôme smiled. "Bonjour, jeune homme. What do you call me?" "Matisse." The name felt like a password. Jérôme nodded and replied, "Tu as un prénom fort." And at that moment, Matisse smiled for real, for the first time in days. Claire, who was waiting for her son outside, saw the scene. When Matisse told her who the man was, she thought he was just another curious person. She thanked him and went on with her son. But deep down, without knowing why, she had the feeling that this meeting was the beginning of something. And it was, because Jérôme already knew what he would do. But first, he wanted to see more. He needed to understand how far this injustice would go, because when the truth was finally revealed, he wanted to make sure that no one there could say, "I didn't know." And the way he would do it, well, you'll understand soon enough. But I can already assure you, it will be spine-chilling. Jérôme returned to school the next day. Same simple car, same discreet clothes, same quiet manner of not wanting to attract attention. But the look, his look was not the same as before. There was something different there. It wasn't just curiosity, it was admiration. Something in that small universe of pain and struggle awakened in him an old, almost forgotten memory. Maybe that's why he stayed longer than necessary in front of the gate, and maybe that's why he decided not just to observe from afar, but to really get closer. Claire was sitting on a concrete bench outside the school, as she did almost every morning. While she waited for Matisse to leave, she took the opportunity to review what she had learned with him. They used an old notebook, with crumpled pages, many of them taped together. The pen was faulty, and the exercises were scribbled, but she read every word, as if she were teaching a prince. And in a way, she was, because in Claire's eyes, Matisse was not just a boy. He was her chance to change an entire story. He was proof that love could be stronger than abandonment. Jérôme watched from afar for a few minutes. It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she looked at her son. The care, the patience, the desire to make things work even without any proper tools. And that's when he approached them. Without formality, without making it clear who he was, he sat down next to them and started a conversation, as if he just wanted to talk. Claire was suspicious at first, but when he asked in the most honest tone in the world, "Why do you insist so much?" she took a deep breath, looked him in the eyes, and answered simply and truthfully, "Because I still believe." It was that straightforward, no beating around the bush, no fancy speeches, just faith, a faith that doesn't shout, but that doesn't fade away. And at that moment, Jérôme felt the weight of those words. They weren't just words, they were a reminder. He knew that faith. He had seen it in his own mother's eyes years ago, when they also lived in a place where no one believed that someone who could change the world could come from there. And now, seeing Claire there, with the same sparkle in her eyes, he understood. That woman carried something inside her that no amount of money could buy. But not everyone saw it that way. A few meters away, Madame Lucille was leaving the gate, returning from her break, when she saw the scene. Claire sitting next to a simple man, laughing, talking, helping her son study with that patched notebook, and Jérôme with the calm posture of someone who seemed not to care about the dust on the sidewalk nor the child's dirty clothes. The sight bothered her. She approached with that look of superiority that only bitter people can maintain for so long, and she said loudly, so that everyone could hear, "Are you going to waste your time with these people? They must want to rob you." The sentence fell like a stone into the silence. Claire froze. The smile on her face disappeared like smoke. It wasn't the first time she had heard something like that, but this time it hurt more, because there was someone there who was finally seeing the real her, and being treated like a thief, like a risk, like trash, right there in that moment of sincere connection, was like being slapped in public. She lowered her head. She didn't say anything, because I didn't know what to say, and also because, no matter how hard she tried, she never got used to that kind of humiliation. Jérôme looked at Lucille. He didn't answer, but his gaze changed. Then he saw, in no uncertain terms, what was really wrong with this place. It wasn't just about Matisse or Claire. It was about the system, about the invisible walls that keep people like Claire out all the time, even when they do everything right. And in that moment, something inside him made up his mind. He didn't say a word, yet, But one thing was certain. The seed of change had been planted, and what would come next, no one there was prepared to see, because when someone with real power connects with real pain, the world around them begins to shake. And on that sidewalk, in front of some school, something had already begun to change, even if most people hadn't noticed it yet. But the next scene, that one will leave everyone open-mouthed, because life, sometimes, responds in ways no one expects. Night fell heavily on Abidjan. The heat of the day seemed to have stuck to the zinc walls of the shack where Claire and Matisse lived. There was no wind, no sound of crickets, just that muffled silence that precedes tragedies. Claire was tired, exhausted even. Her head was spinning with everything she had experienced in the last few hours. Monsieur Jérôme's respectful gaze, the rare moment of lightness with Matisse studying on the school bench, the venom distilled by Madame Lucille, and the shame that still burned inside her chest. But what she didn't know was that the greatest pain was yet to come, and it would come that very night. Matisse had already fallen asleep, curled up under the thin blanket that Claire had spread on the floor. She, even though she was sleepless, lay down next to him, staring at the zinc roof. She heard every creak of the rusty structure as if she were listening to her own thoughts. What if I can't do it? What if all this is in vain? What if this man never comes back? She squeezed her eyes shut and said a soft, whispered prayer, without any big words. She just asked for strength, because that was what she always asked for. Not miracles, not fortune, just the strength to get through another day. But that day, even that wouldn't be enough. It was a strange smell, a thin smoke coming through the cracks in the wood that woke her first. Then, the sudden heat, and in seconds, everything turned into screaming fire and running. Claire grabbed Matisse in her arms, still drowsy, and ran outside. The flames were coming from the side of the shack, as if they had appeared out of nowhere. The fire was spreading fast, much faster than she thought possible. Was there any time to try to save anything? There wasn't any. Documents, clothes, notebooks, even the few cans they had collected, everything turned to ash before their eyes. People came running from all sides, some with buckets, others just to watch. A neighbor tried to help, but the fire was already out of control. And Claire was there, standing barefoot, hugging Matisse. As if trying to protect the whole world with her own body, the boy was crying, clinging to his mother's neck. "Mommy, are we going to die in the street?" he asked, his eyes wide, his face covered in soot, his voice shaking. Claire didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she might not have an answer, that maybe she had really hit rock bottom, and that there was no ground left. She held her son close to her chest and cried. She cried in a way she hadn't cried in years. It wasn't just sadness, it was despair. It was the feeling of being ripped away from the dignity she was still fighting to maintain. It was anger. It was exhaustion. It was a question screaming inside. Why? Someone offered a mat in the backyard. Someone else brought a bucket of water and a blanket, but no one had anywhere to put them. All that was left of the shack was a pile of coal and crooked iron. And there, under the open sky, Claire and Matisse spent the night, sitting huddled, together, scared, cold, and with no idea what they would do the next day. And it was in this grey and silent scenario that Claire, with swollen eyes, looked up at the sky and murmured something she could barely finish. "I still believe, but it's hard, God." And maybe, just maybe, that sentence echoed further than she imagined, because while the smoke was still rising and the neighbors were returning to their homes, a man inside a dark car a few blocks away was looking at his cell phone, reviewing a photo of Claire and Matisse that he had discreetly taken the day before. His face was serious, his gaze was firm, and in his hands, the decision that would change everything. But before that could happen, something even more unexpected was about to happen. Because sometimes, when everything seems to be falling apart, that's when the turning point begins. But no one, not Claire, not Matisse, Not the neighbors. No one could have imagined what was about to happen the next morning. And when I say no one, I mean no one. The sun hadn't even risen yet when Claire woke up, sitting on the dirt floor with her son's body still curled up in her lap. The night had been long, cold, homeless, with no answers. Every part of her body ached, but no pain was greater than that of her soul. She didn't know where she would go, what she would do, or where to start. The shack was gone. Her clothes, ashes, her documents, turned into smoke, and Mattis's eyes, still red from crying the night before, seemed to ask the same question. "What now, Mommy?" Claire tried to get up. She shook the dust off her skirt, tied her hair up haphazardly, and walked to the front of the property as if she were gasping for air. She needed to breathe. She needed to pretend she still had the strength, but what she saw made her doubt her own eyes. A large black luxury car with tinted windows was slowly approaching along the potholed dirt road. It was a car that no one in that area had ever seen up close. The children began to come out of their shacks curious. The neighbors whispered, "Who could that be? Is he lost? I came to see what's going to happen." But it didn't stop there. Behind the car, two more vehicles. One of them had bodyguards, all well-dressed, with a firm posture, as if they were protecting someone important. Very important. Claire froze. Her heart raced, not out of fear, but out of confusion. Nothing made sense. The car stopped right in front of the burned-out lot. The door opened, and out came Monsieur Jérôme. But unlike before, he was no longer the simple man with worn clothes and a dented car. No, he was someone else. He dressed well, but without showing off. His posture was that of someone accustomed to leading rooms with dozens of powerful people. But his gaze was still the same, calm, firm, and deeply human. Claire's eyes widened. She couldn't say anything. Matisse held his mother's hand tightly. The people around her came closer. The scene looked like a movie, but it was real. Jérôme walked to the center of the circle of gazes, and without a microphone, without paper, just with his own voice, said loudly and clearly, "This woman taught me what dignity is." A silence fell over the street. Conversations stopped. The neighbors looked at each other. Claire put her hand to her mouth, not understanding. But Jérôme continued. She, who even without having anything to eat, shared what little she had with those who had even less. Who, even though she was humiliated in front of her son, did not lose her respect or faith. Who, even though she lost everything last night, did not lose hope. He turned to Claire, now with tears in her eyes, and added, "From today onwards, she and her son will live as they deserve." No one moved. It was as if the world had paused to let that sentence echo. And then, the impossible began to happen. From inside the other cars, employees began to get out with folders, boxes, and materials. One of them handed Claire an envelope. It was a housing contract, a new furnished house with the deed in her name. Another employee presented Matisse with school documents, lifetime enrollment in one of the best schools in the Jérôme network, full scholarship, transportation, materials, uniform. Claire trembled. She looked at everything in disbelief. Still with her eyes wide open, she whispered, "But why?" And Jérôme, with the same calm with which he entered her life, replied, "Because you believed when no one else would." At that moment, many people cried, even those who mocked, even those who ignored, even those who, until then, had only known how to judge. Because there, in front of everyone, it wasn't just Claire who was being lifted up. It was justice that was being done. It was kindness that was being rewarded. It was life saying, "I saw." But there was still more to come. Because when the truth comes out, it doesn't come alone. And what Jérôme would say next would change not only Claire and Matisse's lives, but also those who thought they would never be caught for their own actions. And the way he would do it, you won't believe it. The commotion was still taking over the street. The neighbors surrounded Claire, moved, some in disbelief, others apologizing in disguise with pats on the back and looks that said more than words. Matisse still wouldn't let go of his mother's hand. He looked around like someone who had come out of a nightmare and woke up straight into a dream. Claire, on the other hand, was there, standing with her soul spinning. The heat of the shack still burned in her body, and now a breath of new life in her chest. And in the midst of all this, Monsieur Jérôme remained calm, as if he had already known that this moment would come. But not everyone was ready to see that turnaround happen. On the other side of the sidewalk, walking with stiff steps and the venomous look of someone who feels control slipping from their hands, she appeared, Madame Lucille. With her arms crossed and her mouth already trembling with fury, she cut through the crowd like an invisible blade, muttering under her breath, "This isn't right. This is wrong. This woman is an opportunist. She's fooling everyone." Claire saw her approaching, but said nothing. What could she say? She had already understood that some people cannot bear to see light where before there was only darkness. Lucille reached the center, looked at Jérôme with a forced smile and said, "Monsieur, with all due respect, these kinds of people don't deserve this kind of attention. Are they going to lose everything they've built because of a sad story?" The crowd fell silent. Some of them widened their eyes. Claire clenched her hand discreetly, trying to contain the pain of those words. But before she could react, Jérôme stepped forward. He looked straight into the woman's face, as if watching a mask disintegrate. "Madame Lucille, I have been following this school for some time, and yesterday, when I heard your words to this boy, I understood that you have no place where lives are transformed with love." Her eyes widened in confusion. "What do you mean? You're not just a donor, a visitor." "No, I am the owner," he replied firmly. "The school belongs to my network, and as of today, you are no longer part of it." The silence that took over the street was louder than any scream. Madame Lucille's expression instantly fell. She stammered words that didn't come out. Wright looked around for support, but no one came near. There, at that moment, the tables were turned for good. The woman who had mocked the humble for years, who used her position to feed her own ego, was now being removed in front of everyone. No screams, no fuss, only truth. Claire didn't celebrate. She wasn't the type to rejoice when someone fell, but at that moment, a new feeling was born inside her, relief. For the first time, she saw justice happening right there, in front of everyone. Without promises, without delay, without becoming a statistic. And more than that, she saw that kindness, even when ignored, doesn't go unnoticed forever. Matisse looked at his mother with shining eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't ask, "What now, Mommy?" He just smiled. Because now he knew. But what Claire didn't know yet is that this justice was just the beginning. Because when life decides to honor who it truly is, it doesn't just give you an answer. It gives you a new destiny. And what Jérôme still had in store for them would surprise even those who already believed they had seen it all. The next few hours seemed like a dream Claire didn't want to wake up from. After Madame Lucille was fired, people started to look at her differently. They no longer saw a can collector. They saw a woman who had succeeded. They saw someone who, even in the worst phase of her life, had not lost her dignity, had not lost her faith, and was now standing tall, not only because they had helped her, but because she had never stopped believing that it was possible. Jérôme, without much fanfare, handed Claire a simple but meaningful folder. Inside it was the contract for a brand new house, with a yard, furniture, and most importantly, peace, a place where she and Matisse could sleep without fear of rain or fire, without cockroaches invading the blankets, without waking up in the middle of the night to sirens or neighbors fighting. It was a new beginning, a real new beginning. But it didn't stop there. Matisse, his eyes shining and his feet still bare, received from Jérôme himself a package containing new books, a uniform, and a letter. A full, lifelong scholarship. not just for elementary school, but all the way to university. He would now be part of the excellence program of Jérôme's school network, the same program that had already produced young leaders, scientists and artists across the continent. Matisse was no longer going to study just to learn how to read and write. He was going to study to fly, Claire cried. But it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't from pain. It was the kind of crying that comes when the weight of years runs down your eyes and your chest can finally breathe in peace. And just when she thought she had received everything, more came. Jérôme took her aside. He spoke softly, with respect, and said, "You are not just a survivor, Claire. You are an inspiration, and what you have experienced can help other women. I want to invite you to lead a new social project. You will be the coordinator of the Community Impact Program. You will work with us, but most importantly, you will represent those who have never been heard." Claire could barely respond. Her throat was tight. She looked at Matisse, who was already playing with one of his new books, and for the first time in many years she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not pride in status or in title, but in knowing that everything she had endured, every hidden tear, every no she heard, every silent humiliation, all of it had not been in vain. She took a deep breath, held the folder against her chest, and murmured, "Now I am the one who helps mothers like I once was." You've come this far because something in this story touched your heart. Maybe it was Matisse's gaze, Claire's powerful silence, or the sense of justice that finally happened in front of everyone. Somehow this story brought you strength, hope, or even that little push you needed in your day. And look, that wasn't by chance. Stories like this have real power. They heal, they inspire, and they remind us that it's worth keeping on believing. And now you can make this force go even further. When you click on the like, that's it, subscribe. It's not just support for the channel. It's like saying, I also believe in this transformation. And this inspires other people who may need exactly this message. So leave your like, activate the bell, and write the word. Here in the comments, Faith. So I know you felt all of this along with me, and if you want to see what happened next with Claire, with Matisse, or with other characters from this same universe, comment Part 2 down here. Who knows? Maybe she's already coming there? Now pay attention to the video that is appearing here on the screen. The story is different, but the impact may be even greater. It is about someone who, like Claire, was also judged by her appearance, rejected by everyone, and almost gave up until the unlikely happened. And what this person experienced will make you feel everything again, and maybe even stronger. Go ahead, watch it. You won't regret it.